Video games, a form of entertainment played on electronic devices. That's just the definition. We know what video games are. We have played numerous of them with friends, with random people we meet online, and then we get scolded by our parents because we play too much. The video games are really important part of the technological world. From the dawn of computers, it has been there, or even before a computer. The first ever video game that was created was in 1958. It was a game called Tennis for Two. It was a game which had a ball bouncing across the screen with a net in the middle, and the net was more of a pixelated block. Now, I don't know how Tennis for Two was played because it was way before I was born. As I said, back in 1958. Times were different back then. From Tennis for Two, gaming evolved. Now then becoming to arcade games. Arcade classics like Pac-Man and Spacewar were iconic titles. People used to spend hours on them. Then eventually, video games came to home. Iconic titles came to consoles like PlayStation and Nintendo Game Boy. Nintendo Game Boy had the first ever Pokemon game, Pokemon Red, while the PlayStation, it had the first ever Mario game. What we see from then is gaming has continually evolved. Over the years, the industry has expanded from simple pixelated adventures to complex multiplayer experiences. Some of these multiplayer games are now celebrated in the world of esports. We have played a lot of these multiplayer games. Valorant, PUBG, COD, I can go on. And many of us have even considered to play in esports. But hey, coming from a guy who has tried these multiplayer games, especially Valorant, these multiplayer games tend to be a lot frustrating. They said there are toxic teammates or teammates who are so idiot that you kind of question how they even survive in real life. So to get rid of this frustration and to go into a completely different world, there are single player games. Single player games can range from AAA big titles with features like ray tracing and realistic graphics with compelling narratives that are Oscar worthy.
Crazy.
But these also include indie games, which have the same level of compelling narratives, but with a minimalistic art style. However, have you wondered how these groundbreaking visuals are achieved from just a few processors calculating binary code? Probably not, because you're focused on enjoying the game, and so was I. However, this process is crucial not only for creating video games but also for 3D animation as a whole. And that's why I got to researching. Now all these beautiful sceneries imitating real life may look very complex, but they are all made out of vertices. Video game graphics pipeline has 3 steps: vertex shading, rasterization, and fragment shading. Vertex shading. It is done for calculating how the 3D environment will be presented in a 2D screen. This is done by using the field of view of the virtual camera in the video game and then calculating where these objects will be placed in the 2D screen, aka the view screen. The complex models we see in video games are made of numerous flat triangles, which is the simplest 2D shape to exist. Now when rendered, the vertices of these triangles individually arrange themselves in the view screen through multiple steps, finally making themselves feasible in the 2D screen. First, in the modeling space or the virtual space of the model, the XYZ coordinates of the vertices are taken. Then, in the world space or the virtual space where the model exists, its position and rotation are taken. Then the coordinates and the rotation of the camera are taken. Finally, through numerous transformation matrices and multiplying them together, we get a single triangle on our screen. The XYZ coordinates of these vertices are calculated in a view screen. This process is repeated for all the triangles in the field of view of the camera, which can be millions of vertices. This already must have left you wondering how this amount of math is done per frame. It's because our GPU are made to be triangle mesh rendering monsters. But come on, an RTX 4090 is built to render about 10 to 20 million triangles in 4K quality per second. The computer recognizes which pixel in our monitor or real life screen falls under the influence of which triangle. A full HD monitor has about 2073600 pixels, while a 4K monitor has 8294400 pixels. Our GPU then calculates the coordinates of the triangle in our view screen and then assigns the certain pixels to turn to the color that is assigned to the triangles. This creates fragments, which are a group of pixels assigned to a common triangle. Again, this process is repeated for each of the triangles in the scenery. The fragments are all assigned one of the three colors: red, blue, and green. This is where the term RGB comes from. By assigning each fragment one of these colors, the scene comes into play. Now here comes the problem, that is overlapping objects. Excuse my lack of drawing skills, but I think this will get the job done. Here is a box and a sphere, and the shaded regions of the box and the sphere will not be rendered in our view screen. Well then, how is it done? Remember, back in vertex shading, I said not only the x and y but also the z coordinates of these vertices are calculated in our display screen. The z coordinate value is according to the distance of vertices from the very in-game camera. A separate value is taken for the pixels, known as the z buffer value. Now if the z coordinates values are lower than the z buffer, then the fragment is closer to the screen and the pixels are painted. But what if another fragment comes into play? Behold, this is another fragment. The z values in this fragment are again calculated. The second fragment has bigger values than the z buffer. Thus we throw the pixels out and only paint that of the closer fragment. Finally, this is the picture. This is how a rasterization screen looks like of a scenery. The black part means close and the white parts mean far. Hold up, another problem has arrived. These pixels are square while the fragment is a triangle. Won't the triangle be a bit blocky? Then there would be numerous squares being cut by the perimeter of the triangle. This would lead to pixelation of graphics. If you ever go to a graphics settings part of your game settings, you may have seen this term, SSAA. Now you have really not thought about this term, you have just turned it off and on and saw that the performance difference is not that much. So you kept it on anyway. I mean, the more the better, right? But this SSAA stands for Super Sampling Anti-Aliasing. Wow, that sounds really fancy, but it's actually a very simple process. This process makes it such that those certain pixels of the fragment are rendered with much more faded colors. This as a whole makes a lot of difference, and the graphic looks less pixelated. But just the fragment colors don't work. We also have to take the lighting and shading in play too. We all know from various instances while playing video games how beautiful a game can look once applied with good shaders. And this is where folks' fragment shading comes into play. In fragment shading, it is basically coded as such that the surface facing the light source will be brighter and the one that will face away will be darker. I mean, no shit, it obviously will work like that. But how does this work? Well, we take the surface area vector of each of these fragments. We also take the vector of the light source. Then the cosine of the angle of these vectors is calculated. The theta value will be 1 when facing the light and will be 0 when perpendicular from facing it. Further facing away will make it negative, but we will consider 0 as the minimum value. This value is then multiplied with the intensity of light and the RGB assigned to the fragment. The formula is mi cos theta, where m is the color assigned to the fragment, I is the intensity of light. This changes the shading of the certain color based on the direction it's facing the light. However, we kind of know light works completely different in the real world. In the real world, light also gets deflected by the air, and thus a surface facing away from the light is not pitch black. But as I said from the calculation done here, if the surface is perpendicular or facing away from the source, then its value is 0 or negative, causing it to be pitch black. So we add another value called ambient lighting intensity, and we multiply it to the fragment color. Final formula thus becomes mi cos theta plus ma. We then adjust the ambient light to be higher at daytime scenes and closer to 0 in nighttime. For multiple light sources, the calculations are done multiple times individually and then added up. So with n number of light sources, the whole formula will be this. Another problem arises. This time the fact that we take the surface normal makes it such that for the curved surfaces, a flatness appears. For this, we take the normals of the vertices, and by using something called barycentric normal, we create numerous normals in the different heights, making it a curved surface. Now that the three core processes are done, I will discuss something that is relatively new to the gaming world. It has been popularized since 2020 and is now a very known term, and the term is ray tracing. Ray tracing is used to render 3D models in TV shows and movies, with each frame taking to render minutes. Cars, the movie done by Pixar, was one of the first animated films to use ray tracing. Back in those days, each frame took 16 hours to render. Games where frames are done per second in real time thus use ray tracing only for shading. Ray tracing works by shooting these virtual rays of the light source, which bounce off the surfaces of the objects and then finally reach the camera. Each bounce takes a significant value of the initial intensity of light. Once the camera gets the ray, the points which came in contact with the ray are rendered. Like this, the whole scenes are rendered. However, many of these rays cannot reach the camera. Even then, millions of rays are needed to render a small scene. Hence, ray tracing is done in limited ways in video games, where only shading is done by it. It's used for performance. Many people think they should not use it, while many people think that they should use it. But what is it? Well, DLSS is an algorithm that uses a convolution neural network and transforms a low resolution frame to a high resolution frame. Thus, this occurs after normal rendering and ray tracing. But it is really surprising to believe that all these processes are done in every single frame of our video games. And here we play with average of 60 frames per second. This really puts us into vision how technology has evolved to provide us of what we have right now, and makes us appreciate of the intellect of these engineers who have worked their lives and careers to simply bring this into play. Thanks for watching the video.